Grazie, Antonio. No, I think that we needed a little lecture on the context and the basis of the social impact assessment. Okay, so I thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to have here Guadalupe, PhD in sociology at the University of Alicante. And she's an associate professor of the Department of Sociology, Deputy Director of the Institute of Water and Environmental Sciences, and she's specialized in environmental sociology with works focusing on the development of methodological tools for the diagnosis and management of social environmental problems.
So thank you very much, Ferry, for having us today. It's been a pleasure for us meeting you all. And it's always challenging to meet colleagues that are working the same things, but from a very different perspective. So for us, it's really a pleasure. We're really used to working with multidisciplinary teams at the Institute of Water and Environmental Sciences, to which we belong. But it's always interesting to have the feedback from non-sociologists. So we're looking forward to know what you think about what we do, because that's what I'm going to present now. I'm going to tell you how do we apply all these somehow theoretical ideas into the practice, because actually our team is it's focused on the application, the practical application of what sociology can give to risk management. So we have a very applied approach. So today I want to present a project that we're just starting at our team that I think connects very well with two of the main trends, recent trends within flood risk management, that are, first of all, the adaptive approach, this trend that focuses on the way people respond to flooding events, and how to build capacities to better adapt and face these stressful and disastrous events. That on one side, the adaptive approach, but also the integrative approach, this idea that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that both structural and non-structural measures are needed to efficiently face flood risks. For a long time, risk management has been focused on the structural strategies, and engineering and architecture and natural sciences have had an obviously important role in defending populations from flooding events, but it's been acknowledged that not everything can be based in structural measures, and non-structural measures are also necessary in terms of land use planning, risk awareness, capacity building, and so on. Early warning systems, and many of the things that have been discussed earlier. So we try to connect these two approaches, which are also an example of how the field has been evolving from this idea of defending and reacting and protecting to flood risk towards a more adaptive and preventive approach. So as you will see, we try to combine these two trends in this project. The project, we have been lucky enough to have been awarded with a national grant to begin this 3-year project on developing tools for the prevention and management of flood social impacts in coastal areas. It's very hard for sociologists to be awarded with these national grants, and we we are really lucky to be able to start this project, that it's also funded by the regional government in Valencia, which is the area we belong to. So we'll be working with 6 case studies. We've chosen 6 flooding events that represent different types of flooding events in Spain and with different characteristics. The main one is the one that Antonio was talking about, that happened in 2019 in the south of the province of Alicante, where we live and we work. And we have 3 more national case studies and also 2 international ones. So let me just tell you a bit more about why do we think that this project is necessary or interesting. What's the research problem behind this project? Antonio has been introducing some of these ideas, but we've been, and not only us, obviously, in the academia, in recent times there has been, or it's starting to be developed, this critical approach to the way social vulnerability has been studied since the beginning of this field. For a long time, mainstream of applied social vulnerability research has been focused, and something has been discussed in Maurizio's presentation, this idea that social vulnerability, which is the maybe I should have said this before, these 2 trends that I was talking at the beginning of the presentation, the adaptive and the integrative approaches, have been very well represented in the practice through the concept of social vulnerability. This idea that about the social aspects of risk that Antonio was talking about. So the problem with the way that social vulnerability has been understood and analyzed in the past is that most of the work for a very long time was based in the idea of building indexes that you were talking about earlier, how to transform something as complex as social vulnerability in a number that gives information and useful information for risk managers. The problem is that these indexes, mainly based on the works of Susan Carter in the 90s, the problem is that they're usually constructed through social demographic information. This idea that we can describe the level of social vulnerability of a population by looking at very specific elements that are usually found in statistical databases, depending on the number of old people, the race of the population, the socioeconomic status, the educational level. These elements that can be quantified and are very descriptive, they give us information about the level of social vulnerability of a population. But the problem is that it's usually very superficial and this very descriptive scope, in the sense that, okay, we know how old the population is here, we know how many people of each race we have, we know the economic status of this population, and that what it tells us that we have a social vulnerability of 0.7. So what? Okay, because I can't change the age of people, I can't change the race. So how do I work with that? What does it tell me in a practical manner of what I can do to reduce the level of social vulnerability, how to make populations more resilient to floods? So it doesn't give us much information. And also, these works on social vulnerability are usually, they don't focus on this idea that Antonio was trying to convey of the complexity of the generative process of social vulnerability. Why does a population reach a specific level of social vulnerability? The causes are the important things, because those are the elements that we can change. So it's not, it doesn't usually have this causistic approach. It excludes non-measurable or intangible aspects of risks, such as trust in institutions, which have been proven to be essential elements that can help to understand why a population or community can face better or worse a specific flooding event. Trust institutions, risk awareness, adaptive capacities, knowledge of self-protection measures. All these things are intangible, so they are not found in statistical databases, and they are essential to understand how people react, how people respond, how people adapt to a situation like this. So it does not explain how the social demographics translate into adaptive capacities, which is the important thing in our opinion, how people respond and how people adapt, which is what we can change. We can change how people respond to a situation. We cannot change the age of people. Okay, so this is more operative in terms of risk management. And also the other side of the problem was the science policy gap that has been well documented in the literature, this lack of transfer from the academia to the institutional managers, and also the prevalence in the managing institutions of specific profiles that make it hard for social sciences in this case to transfer information. If I only have engineers on the other side, it's going to be very hard for me to communicate or it's been very difficult in the past in terms of language and epistemic communication, as Antonio said before. So there's a problem in how all this knowledge that has been produced from social sciences and or other fields specialized in flood risk management translates into operative and useful information for managers. So we try to move from that approach of social vulnerability based on indexes and descriptive approaches into another way of understanding social vulnerability that focuses on the capacitive dimension of social vulnerability, because we think that it's the more operational approach to social vulnerability, or at least the more useful for managers. If managers know what capabilities, what capacities have to be modified, then they can do something. They can't act on these statistical descriptions that used to be the base of social vulnerability research. So we understand social vulnerability the same way that they do, for example, at the IPCC, which use this definition set of social, economic, political, and cultural factors that determine the capacity of individual groups or institutions or systems to cope with negative consequences of events and recover from them. So the adaptive capacity, the capacity is the key element of social vulnerability. I'm vulnerable if I, depending on what I can do and how I do it and what resources I use efficiently or not to adapt to face a flooding event. So we go to the literature and we see that this approach has been used from three different perspectives in three main bodies of work that have been working independently. They are not connected in the literature, which is this focus on the generative causes of social vulnerability, this idea that Antonio was saying, the complexity of how vulnerability is created. Then we have the literature on adaptive capacities, mainly the work of Christian Gulicke and Bergman. They have this approach to social vulnerability, but is not necessarily connected to generative causes. And then we have all the literature on social impact assessment, which is our main line of work, as Antonio said. And we believe that there's a clear connection between all these bodies of work that have been disconnected. So what we want to do in this project is to connect all these three levels of understanding of social vulnerability. First, study, or at one point study, the generative level of the concept or of the of social vulnerability to flood risk. Here we have all the work by Blakey with the pressure on release literature and so on, this idea that vulnerability is created through root causes, deep causes, intermediate or medium level pressures or causes that finally lead to the specific conditions that the population has to face risks. Then we have the adaptive level, which focuses on this capacitive idea of social vulnerability, what people do and how they do it, and what resources they have and use in the face of a flooding event, different kinds of social capacities regarding knowledge, social networks, social capital, motivations, economy, institutions, and so on. And within this level, within that we have two levels: the capacitive, what capacities I have, what abilities I have to confront the event, and then the way I put them into action. The moment the event is here, how do I act? How do I put those capacities into use in a practical sense? How we respond, or people respond, how they put capacities into actions from an institutional level, community, or individual level. And then we have the experiential level. As Antonio said, in social impact assessment, at least in the approach that we use to social impact assessment, social impacts are understood as the way people experience the stressful event or the change. So we think that we can apply social impact assessment also to understand the way social vulnerability is translated into the way people experience the event. So we are covering these two conceptual levels of vulnerability: the structural one, the vulnerability that a system has before the event, because we have this chronological also the chronological process, what happens before the event, during the event, the way people respond during the event, and then we would have the impacts after the event has happened. So what we the usefulness of this model that we want to apply is that we use this hypothesis that we can track down the generative process of social vulnerability from the impact backwards until the generative causes of social vulnerability. This is what is going to be done during the process. We want to identify, as I will explain quickly in a minute, we will identify and analyze the impacts of these case studies that I've talked about at the beginning. We want to analyze exposed, or we want to do an exposed social impact evaluation or assessment. And then we want to track from those impacts, we want to understand why did they happen, what capacities were used, what were lacking, what are the elements that explain why the impacts happened the way they did. That would be in a very simple terms, what we want to do in this project. So first, we want to know what are the main social impacts caused by flood events in the case studies that we are studying, that we are focusing on. And we want to understand which elements participate in the generative process of those impacts. We want to track down the production process of those impacts. What capacitive elements shape social vulnerability in these case studies, according to these social impact assessments, throughout the whole disaster cycle, pre-event, event, and post-event, and what strategies would make it possible to integrate the knowledge that we produce for a more effective disaster risk management. So I'm going to go through this very quickly because more or less I've explained all of this, but we want to create a tool that's useful for risk managers to identify the social capacities that need to be modified, reinforced, strengthened in order to prevent social impacts of floods. That would be the general idea. So we have these three main sub-objectives. I understand the impacts and their generative processes, identify the social capacities that need to be strengthened and worked on to avoid the impacts in future events, and then to create a tool that's useful for managers to identify these key areas of work for the future. So the main outputs of this project would be mainly four of them. First of all, we would have social impact assessments of the case studies that we are working with. Then, and this is what Antonio was introducing before, this tool that we've used in previous works that helps us track down these generative processes of impacts, which are the use of causal maps and network analysis. Then the creation of this online tool, open access tool for managers, and all the transfer and dissemination actions. I know how much time I have, 5 minutes. Okay, so Antonio told you about the main stages of social impact assessment, so I'm not going to go through them again, but obviously we would have a first stage of evaluating and identifying impacts with all the classical stages in social impact assessment. We've developed a very well or robust methodology for identifying and analyzing impacts in past. So we will do all of this. If we have time later, maybe we can go through them. I wanted to tell you a bit more about these causal and network analysis that we've used in previous projects, not that we haven't worked with in disasters. We are applying this to disasters now, but Antonio has a long line of work on applying this to the impacts of large infrastructures. So what we do is to, oh, sorry, it's in Spanish for some reason, sorry. So we want to track down the generative process of the impacts. Once we have them identified and analyzed, we want to track down what caused those impacts the way they happened in the end in those case studies. So what we usually do, we do this either in a participatory way or collective way or individually with stakeholders that we identify in each case study. We ask them, first of all, we've identified all the impacts and we want to understand their recalling or the way they explain why they think they suffered, they experienced the impact the way they did. So we do this with a very simple tool, which is the causal map. You see how people draw the ideas. Why did this happen? And then they start identifying causes. And why do you think this cause happened? And then they go tracking back down the generative process. But obviously we have many different stakeholders. And what we do is we put everything together thanks to the software that we have for network analysis. We transform these different networks in a common network. Obviously there's filtering and categorizing process in the middle, and then we send it to these softwares that help us understand or they give us more information that it's visible in these complex networks. We use these different analysis to understand the way and the role of each of the cause in the whole generative process. So we can identify intermediate or hotspot elements that have a large effect on the whole network. For a manager, what we've seen in previous research is that for managers, it's very interesting to understand what are the key elements in the generative process of the problem I have, that if I work on them, they would have this expansive wave, or this it's more efficient to act on them than maybe on other elements of the problem. So we do this kind of work, and we believe that this is going to be helpful to identify social capacities that are the more efficient in terms of having a consequence on the reduction or minimization of the impacts in the end. Then we want to translate all of that into an open access tool that help managers to identify. So we don't have much time for this, but this idea that they can identify the social capacities that they need to work on to have an expansive or more efficient effect on the whole complex network of generative processes. So, and then we would obviously present, disseminate, transfer to risk management institutions. So this is what we will be working on for the next 3 years. And we would love to know how you, from your perspective, from your different areas of expertise, how do you, maybe we can have some feedback later on. So, thank you.
Grazie.